Hello world of YouTube. Sometimes inspiration can come from the strangest of places. Take for example this Godsmack Discography review. While they have been a band that I've needed to cover in the new format, they're also a band that I fell off of 10 years ago and knew that I had to do some catch up. However, because the new Prince of Persia game dropped this year and it fucking rips, if you haven't played The Lost Crown, you should absolutely do so. Even if Godsmack isn't in the newest game, they were a part of the series when I was really a big fan of it. And I figured that was enough inspiration alone, along with the fact that when looking into the band, they've now stopped releasing albums. This is the perfect time for me to list out Godsmack's discography from worst to best in this reformatted format, with a sort of roadmap of sorts, if you want to call it that, for getting into a band that, again, I have not cared about for over 10 years at this point. I'm not necessarily gonna be the most positive when talking about this band's music, because even if I used to spin them a fuck ton, they are not a band that I would say I get nostalgic for in the same way that I do other rock bands and metal bands that I loved when I was younger. Of course, with the members of Godsmack, you've got Sully Erna on lead vocals, you've got Robbie Merrill's bass, which, ironically enough, for as, sterile as a lot of the band's, music can sound, the bass, when it pops off, is one of the more interesting, or at least better utilized components sonically. Tony Rumbola's guitars, and you got Shannon Larkin, who's been the drummer for them for a majority of their career. They got 8 albums that I'm going to be ranking from worst to best, and while I will not be saying a whole lot of kind things about this band, I will be finding ways to say nice things about what this band does for their fans in the current year. Give it a like if you're excited, and before I rank, they do have one EP that, ironically enough, I have a physical copy of, that I'm going to talk about right now. Any man be honest inside. The Other Side is an acoustic EP that they dropped in 2004, and is the closest the band has ever come to sounding like their namesake. While they may have been named after an Alice in Chains song, they don't remind me of them whatsoever, outside of this EP. And I think that this EP might be the best thing the band has ever done, because it translates their aggressive tendencies, a la songs like Realign and Keep Away and Asleep and Voices, which are all songs from their albums that they've flipped into this acoustic atmosphere. I think work in this acoustic atmosphere relatively well. And while I don't think Sully sounds like Lane Staley, and they don't have the harmonies like Alice in Chains, there's moments of this where that inspiration seems like it's coming to light, and I think is, again, just where this band should have really been dancing in, because while their aggressive stuff is very much the bread and butter of this band, something about reeling that back just worked wonders for them, in my opinion. If you're going to listen to anything from Godsmack, maybe just because it's just a small little baby EP, and you want some just like mellow, grunge offshoot acoustic shit, this EP's not terrible. Again, you can do better. Jar of Flies is out there. You can listen to that. But, like, if you want some watered-down shit, this isn't too bad. Something about the fact that they're not buried by this brick-style production just lets a song like Realign really sing better, in my opinion. And some of the ways that they flip, like, some of the percussion and stuff to when they, slow things down, I think it just makes for a more creatively interesting adventure for a band that I would argue is one of the least creatively ambitious bands that's been running for the last 20 plus years. But that's probably the nicest I'm going to be this video. Regardless, let's actually rank their albums proper. Side unfolding, hey, I can't wait for you to... Now, because I hadn't invested in Godsmack's music in a good 10 years, I'd skipped their last 3 albums and I had listened to them for this video. Spoilers, all 3 of them are on the bottom 3 spots in this ranking, and I think that nostalgia absolutely plays into that, at least a little bit. But man, their last album, Lighting Up the Sky, is a special kind of, like, the end of the boomer pipeline. When listening to those 3 albums, I kind of got this, like, weird parallel with, like, an aging Gen Xer. You know, a lot of those bitterness seeping to the surface and frustrations and anger pivoted at different facets of the world, but, like, sounding more and more like boomerish, which, like, there's a facet of the Gen X circle that definitely feels like they're all evolving into that mindset, but, like, a lot of this has a lot of the grand, vague platitudes of a Godsmack album, but adds on top of that these moments where they're trying to come full circle and branch off into other realms that, I'll be honest, were kind of weird for me to hear them tackle. Like a full-blown America fuck yeah song with Red, White, and Blue. But like Best of Times, Growing Old, Let Go, all these songs have themes of like finality and rounding the bend of life. I think that the band does all of the on-the-nose, predictable things with those topics, right down to a little voodoo reference as the band builds to this grand finale on the title track. It's just got all of the formulaic recipes for a Godsmack album, only it came out in 2023, so it sounds just like this weird excerpt from a pocket dimension where 2005 never stopped happening. I didn't have fun with any of these, and I thought that honestly, after spending 1,000 horsepower, the last two would be better than it. But ironically enough, their last album didn't cross that threshold, and I would argue is easily their worst record, if only for being the most obvious, the most on the nose, and pivoting into directions that just feel all the more strange for this band in their final hour. Not worth your time, but that's just my opinion. Let's grab some select comments from their YouTube channel, because they have YouTube comments enabled for all of their songs to get a slice for what people think about, you know, songs from this album that happen to like it. Godsmack never disappoints us. You guys are the best writers and musicians I've ever had the privilege to know. Yo, metalheads, do you remember when we all gathered together in solidarity with music? I stand with my metal brothers and sisters. Godsmack is still putting out good stuff. This might be Godsmack's greatest solo. Incredible song.
You run around your little town preaching and hiding from...
While they tote this album at going at 1,000 horsepower in the title track out the gate, and I think that the energy on that song is absolutely palpable, this album, I think, ironically enough, acts as the beginning of the pivot towards that end of the Gen X boomer pipeline I was talking about, because it has all that surface level confrontation that this band had been writing with throughout a lot of their first 5 records, with tracks like Fuck My Life and What's Next and Locked and Loaded or Nothing Comes Easy, having all of that confrontational energy that they very much championed, while also having songs like, but also throw songs like Living in the Gray in there, which try to, you know, add a lot of ambiguity to one's moral compass in a way that feels very in line with, like, the Gen X to Boomer pipeline, along with tracks like Generation Day, also having that turn of nose at the younger kids and how the future's fucked because we were the last great generation. It's just got a lot of energy on it that I don't really fuck with. And I think that on top of having this, like, sterile, flaccid production that doesn't let any of the band's redeemable qualities, for as small as I think there are, get to shine in any meaningful ways. And just all of the writing has the base, you know, again, shallowness that I would expect from the band, but it's just pivoted slightly enough that I just really do not fuck with it in a more extreme way than I do any of the stuff that I have nostalgia for. I'd argue if you love records like Faceless and The Oracle and you want, like, more of that energy, 1,000 Horsepower has that. I just don't think it does anything all that gratifying with that energy. Even if I don't think that, you know, as of right now, their earlier stuff doesn't either. I just don't have the nostalgia for this. But that's, again, just my opinion. Let's hear some positive words about the band from the comments of some of the songs. Man, bro, Godsmack still fucking rocks. I love the power behind the lyrics. Millions of horsepower? Let's say trillions. Jesus, this song is sick. It needs radio play. Awesome song. Who's Frank? Now, I did listen to their last 3 albums in order, and with how bad I thought 1,000 Horsepower was, I had no high hopes for their last two records. But with Legends Rise, even if it's not better sonically, lyrically, it's at least not as, like, forwardly aggressive. And it feels like they pivot more of that just boomer aggression into an avenue that at least tries to be somewhat hopeful or inspirational, and I can co-sign that better than, like, blind rage at somebody just because you don't understand something, or you think that, like, your ambiguity makes you better than anybody else. Take, for example, a track like Bulletproof. While LaRue's Bulletproof is a better anthemic, amped anthem, they at least tried their hand at doing so with this. You know, same with Unforgettable. Tracks like Under Your Scars feel like they're trying to pull at some emotional chord in a way that I don't think really sticks the landing, but again, mood-wise, I think it's at least a little more conductive, or at least a little more progressive than just the boomer rage that feels like it's seeding from a record like 1,000 Miles Per Hour. I feel like if you're a fan of just, like, stadium rock music from the 2010s, a lot of the production on this is gonna hit you. The guitars sound big, the drums sound bold as fuck, and I think that the grand, vague platitudes that the band is writing with could resonate with someone to some degree. You know, they have moments where they try to go at some of that aggressive side, you know, and, you know, feel like, show that they haven't lost that edge. But those moments feel few and far between on this record, which I would say it's probably its biggest credit. You know, a track like Let It Out talks about purging all of that negative energy, and I can at least admire them wanting to spin something positive for a band that always goes for the most surface-level, aggressive result. I will say, I don't like the production on here. I don't think it's their worst production they've dealt with, but I think as far as, like, making their stuff sound distinct or sound like their stuff, this doesn't do a good job at doing that. I feel like if you enjoy some of the mood on, like, a record like Awake, you might like some of the mood on this, or if you like some of the again, just 2010s-ass rock stuff. It's still not good. It's still hot garbo, in my opinion. I think the production is really flat. I think a lot of the riff work is really plain Jane and sounds just like every other Godsmack riff. I think that the soft stuff on here sounds even more stock than any of the soft stuff throughout their career. And I think that as far as, like, being the sort of middle piece of this boomer transition that the band sort of felt like they were going through, it definitely feels like that, with some of the aggressive stuff that still comes through with a hopeful undertone throughout a lot of it. But I just think that, like, you could be spinning so much of other better shit. This sounds like the most stock 2010s rock music out there. But again, that's just my opinion. Let's hear some of the other comments about some of the other songs from this album from fans of Godsmack. Been playing on repeat for the entire day. Fucking love it. Can't ever get enough volume. I'm addicted to the drum battle. Every Friday, I blast it through my cave and try to play some bongos along with them. Straight great always! It's a crime that this is the least viewed song on the album. This whole album is fucking awesome! Give us more, Godsmack! The truth, I am a new believer, but our bond is ancient. The fact that Godsmack and Pastor Steve Furtick are in us is legendary because he first loved us. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 1 through 13. This is proof of our love, because truly Jesus Christ did not conform to the pattern of this world. We the people are here just because of Jesus Christ. Proof, love is the greatest of these. Somebody gotta feel this. Now, even when I was younger, I didn't really like 4 all that much, and I, you know, had some problems with some of the tangential stuff that this album is spinning, but in hindsight, that stuff is probably the best part about this, because the producer that they work with, while a legendary producer who worked with some of the greatest rock bands of their era, he did not know how to make Godsmack's brand of heaviness sound good. It's different, I'll give it that. The production on here, probably the most different sounding Godsmack album out of their whole discography. But I wouldn't say that's necessarily a good thing about it. You know, tracks like Temptation, or Speak, or The Enemy, the guitars and drums have this production to them that just don't sound great. They sound big and bold, but in all of the worst ways. They don't sound bricked. Again, I'll give it that. It's produced competently. I just don't think it sounds good for Godsmack. And on top of that, tracks like Voodoo 2, which just are kind of like the same derivative sauce that seems like the band was sort of trying to spin out of their circles that they were sort of running around in over their first 3 records, found themselves in a pocket that I think is less interesting at the end of the day. You know, I think that the opener, Living in Sin, at least gets this record off on a decent foot. However, I will say, when it comes to, like, again, bridging the worlds of their inspiration to who they actually are, a track like Hollow does kind of bridge that gap pretty solidly. Again, I don't think Sully's a lane, and I think that their harmonies really need to be a forefront if they're going to, like, channel that or evoke Alice in Chains. But I think as far as, like, acoustic songs go, and as far as the production complementing that, it sounds pretty good. And obviously, this is where, like, my nostalgia love comes in. So I do have some of sort of, like, a nostalgic fondness for some of the tracks that I've already slammed, or tracks like No Rest for the Wicked. But again, I don't get nostalgia for Godsmack, where I spin their music for a reason, and it's because it all has this sort of samey feel to a lot of the discography. The production across these records are more just kind of what helps each aspect of this band sort of stand out for better or worse. And while I think that the production on this is at least different, I don't think it's all that good. You know, I feel like this is a cherry-picking experience at the very least. Maybe spin the singles, see if they stick with you before going to some of the other harder rock stuff on here. But I think that the pivots that they make on here aren't that interesting, and the production on top of that just makes it not good or worth a revisit, in my opinion, all these years later. But again, that's just my opinion. Let's talk about some of the opinions that Godsmack fans themselves have been having on 4 throughout all these years. That's right, you shit-talking punks. You truly are an inspiration for something that I never want to be. God bless Godsmack. Very interesting tones on this album. Guitars sound like beard trimmers and hair clippers. Best Godsmack song ever. Gives me chills every time. This could be my anthem for life. So many of the comments I just noticed kind of describe this album as Seether feeling, and I think that's much more apt. It's got that, like, SummerSlam energy with some of the guitars, but Seether, that's a good way to describe 4. The most Seether. I think I like this album more as a teenager than I do now, because Spinning Awake, a lot of the lack of substance, I think, kind of pulled this record lower and lower on the echelon for me. I think that the production on this is that quintessential early Godsmack that I think sounds good, or at least defined. Every element has its, you know, pocket, and they all sit in it very cleanly. The bass especially, I think, sounds pretty damn good on this record as a whole, and I think as far as, like, letting that be a defining component of at least their early sound, the bass play on here keeps that low end resonate with a strong presence. But, like, man, this record really, like, as far as, like, the surface, this doesn't go all that deep, and has some moments that, like, while interesting, don't feel like they fit in the record as a whole, you know, because I think that, like, the aggression and the angst seen on tracks like Sick of Life, or Greed, you know, or Mistakes, which kind of have their, you know, aggressive tendencies that I talked about with this band, the moments where they sort of dip away from that, or at least try to, like, find themselves in different realms, like in the instrumental Vampires, which I enjoy, if only because, like, it's a break from some of the energy that this band has been driving with, or, you know, the closer Spiral. I think that those moments, while I think are the ones that stick with me better throughout the years, I don't think that, like, you know, how you've even got a track like Going Down, which is pretty much purely led by bass, and I think is, again, all the better for it, because the bass production on here is pretty fucking good. I don't think that they match the components that I definitely liked more when I was younger, like the more aggressive stuff like Bad Magic, or the title track, and it creates this, like, weird back and forth where, like, the album has this front-loaded feel, and the back half, while having some of the more interesting songs, sort of detract away from the energy the record's been throttling with, and I think makes it a more of a whimpering close than the strong start that it began with. I think if you enjoyed their first album and you want to hear their last album with their original drummer, I think that he at least went out with a banger, or I think he at least went out with some solid bangers in the band's catalog. But I think, again, that as far as, like, growing on their first album sound. I don't think they necessarily focused on all the components that really worked for the band on their debut. You know, it's a record that I could see myself getting more nostalgic for than some of the other records that I've talked about thus far. But again, I just don't for Godsmack, man. There's something about the older that I got, the more that I just got so not interested in their particular brand of hard rock. And it's a record like this that sort of, you know, feels indicative. This and a record that's higher up on the list. But, like, I also think that, like, if you just enjoy 2000s rock and you haven't spun Awake, it's gonna do something for you. Because there's some strong guitar-driven tracks on here. They're just ones that I've heard so fucking much and just have little desire to revisit as a 32-year-old. Now, while I can see some people saying that The Oracle really was the start of, like, the Gen X boomerification of this band, with tracks like Crying Like a Bitch and Whiskey Hangover being, like, the lead singles to this and really solidifying the sort of mission statement of this project, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. I just think that sonically this record is a lot more consistent than Awake, and that while the production isn't maybe as dynamic as parts of the production on Awake, I think that's because the band is kind of playing it straight and keeping it as on the nose in all the ways that Godsmack do well. This sets it above that. It's still got some solid, you know, playing from the guys. I think that, like, as far as keeping it consistent playing wise, this is also better than Awake in my opinion. You know, while it's still doing the, like, very surface level writing thing of, like, allegories of saints and sinners, you know, bass level stuff and, you know, bass driven stuff like What If, or, you know, going into that generic anthemic style like on Good Day to Die, while having some fun little flips like on Devil Swing. You know, it's got enough. It's got just barely enough to, like, be a more engaging experience than Awake, and I would say that's what sets it above it, at least to a modicum of degree. You know, this is a record that I've got more nostalgia for than Awake, at least more personal nostalgia. You know, I spun this the day that it came out with Jesse, who I did the old review of Godsmack with, and we both went, you know, crazy over it. We love the way that this sound, and I think that the guitar sounds on here, I think, are better produced and, you know, better woven with the rest of the band also on this. And I think that, like, as far as, again, just being a more consistent record by the band, I think The Oracle is that. If anything else, at least that. It's the point where, like, the band's got the most, like, average shit. You know, I think I'd give Awake, like, a 5 for nostalgia. I'd give this a 5 for, like, just generally being a coherent rock album. I still don't think it's all that great. I think if you like Faceless, you should spin this, because it's, again, got that same energy like 10,000 or like 1,000 horsepower, but I don't think it again does anything all that good with it. It's just very surface level Godsmack rock music. But that's just my opinion. Let's see what other people have to say about it. One of the best songs from the album absolutely kicks ass. Never used to be that bothered by this song, but I've been listening to a lot lately. Been listening to this since I was 2, and it's still my favorite. Absolutely extraordinary. Robbie's bass, though, god damn, this is great. God smacking great, even. Bad religion from a broken nation. It's the foundation for which a lot of their ideas would crop up throughout their career, while being an okay hard rock album from the late 90s. Godsmack's debut has some components of it that I think honestly would have made their sound more interesting if they, you know, decided to use them more, like some of the sounds on Time Bomb, or, you know, kept some of that energy on a track like Whatever or Moon Baby throughout the career. Voodoo, obviously, is a colossal song for this band, and, you know, I would argue poorly shaped their future, because I feel like they took components of that and continued to try and, like, adapt them throughout their career, both directly and indirectly, in ways that I think are kind of some of the messier parts of their career. But as far as, like, having that surface level writing, you know how you're supposed to feel when spinning the song throughout a runtime, the debut's got a lot of that. And as far as I think one of the reasons why I'd set this above everything else on the discography is partially because they just sound hungrier. You know, it's their debut, so they're a young, energetic band, and that energy feels the most palpable on here than it does the rest of their career. I don't think that the production on here is the best. I honestly think that the production on a record like The Oracle or the one above this is better, but there's components of this that I think led to some interesting experience after this point. Like Immune as well, being this instrumental track that's sample-filled, very much feels like the A to Vampires is B, and I honestly think is a little more interesting than Vampires. The guitar production at least has that 90s edge to it that I think sets it above their 2000s muddy-ass guitar that coats a lot of their material. And I feel like if you're going to be starting with this band, if you aren't starting with the album I'm putting above this, you should start with their self-titled and just kind of comb through the discography, see which records sit with you. Again, I hadn't spun their discography in a long time, nor do I plan on doing so after this video's done. But I think if you're going to be getting into Godsmack, if you want to give these guys a shot, their debut's not a bad place to go and just kind of go forward through the discography. Watched the journey unfold before you. You know, while I think that they've got other records that I think are stepping stone projects, or at least a lot of their records are good if you like Faceless, I think that as far as like giving you a more full picture of what this band's got going on, their debut does a better job than other records like Awake at 4 and 4 do to like showcase that this band is more than just butt rock riffs and surface level lyrics. They just have a bad time at sort of portraying that in a lot of their music, actually. That's just my opinions. Let's talk about some of the stuff that fans have to say from comments of their songs. This album has hardcore riffs for the 90s. This fucking rocks! Thank you for a different frame of mind. Much love! Definitely not a problem for Godsmack to always deliver the best music in the music world. Never have to worry about this kick-ass rock and roll band. They've already proven themselves to be a great fit for the times. Love you guys and hope to hear for your next album. Thanks so much for the music, talent, and the music we all love. This is the one! This is the one with the song from this and the Scorpion King. It's got a lot of that angry, aggressive, macho energy that people would come to this band for, just in a really concise listening experience. And I think that if you're not listening to their debut to get into the band, you should listen to Faceless, because it's probably one of the few albums you're gonna walk away from thinking is the most okay. As far as like a surface level band giving you the most surface level rock experience, Godsmack's Faceless might be that record for you. If you want the most 2000s angry ass music, Godsmack's Faceless is that experience. Giving you the one emotion for the song. A majority of the titles really just kind of give you what you're gonna expect. You know, Realign is about finding yourself. Releasing the Demons is about purging your negativity to find that positivity on the other side. Make Me Believe and Changes are talking about confrontation or going through changes of yourself. They have a song on here called I Fucking Hate You. You know, while this record isn't deep with its emotions, it's got a lot of them, and it speaks them all very, very loudly. With production that I think suits a lot of that surface level aggression tenfold, because the guitars are bold, the drums are punchy, and it all has this just in-your-face energy that I think this record, aptly, you know, ironically enough, even if it's Faceless in title, does a good job at doing so. You know, gets you amped, gets you angry, gets you ready to tackle on gods in the world alike. It's a record that I, again, leave in the past. I'll be leaving in the past, but when I was spinning it and had it in my rotation, I very much loved the riff work on here, and I think that a lot of the production honestly helps some of that riff work sound a little more interesting, honestly. Let's hear from some of the fans for what they want to say about some of the songs from this album. Fucking Godsmack, man. We'll never get into one of these groups. Lyrics hit home, shit jumps in my work van. This whole album is a classic. It got me through many bouts of depression in an upstairs closet. What? This song is so fucking good. I got my Godsmack tattoo. It's sore, but it's awesome. Love this song forever. This is my favorite song in the world. Thanks, Godsmack. You guys have given me a song that I can and do relate to more than any other songs out there. And those are my thoughts and some fans' thoughts of Godsmack's select songs and my thoughts on their discography as a whole. Again, they just aren't for me anymore. I'm glad they got fans. I'm glad they still got a passionate fan base. I'm glad people still follow their stuff and enjoy the music that they put out. I'm just not one of them. And if you are a fan of Godsmack, I didn't make this to shame you for liking Godsmack. This is just my opinion on a band that I don't like anymore, for the sheer fact that I got inspired by a game that I think kicks a lot of ass and reminded me that I used to love Godsmack back in the day. What are your thoughts on Godsmack's discography? Do you have a favorite album of theirs? Do you have a least favorite? Let me know those in the comments down below. If you like this, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on. I'm going to go, though. Thank you again so very much for watching. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have a good day's lives and situations. And I'll see you another day.